Jamidi.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't really expecting chicken farming or Tannadice or South Pacific. Well, maybe South Pacific, but we've heard some cracking good speeches today, and I, for one, feel privileged to be a member of this Parliament and to have the opportunity to speak in this debate. When Marco Biaggi was reading some of the comments from his constituents, it put me in mind of how I might have felt if this legislation had been passed in Scotland when I was coming out, or more particularly, when I didn't yet feel able to. I think the message that we send by passing this legislation will be extremely positive, and many, many young people, some of whom frankly feel baffled that this is even an issue, I think their response will become the mainstream response, and I think a great many people in Scotland, a few years down the line, will wonder what all the fuss was about. I do want to pay credit to the government, both the current Cabinet Secretary and Nicola Sturgeon, who was the previous Minister in charge, as well as the committee and its previous members, and the many, many campaigners who've worked so hard on this issue. It's taken us a little bit longer than Westminster to get to this point, but I believe that partly because of that time spent and partly because of the amendments in committee, we have a better bill as a result. There's been a good degree of cross-party consensus, and I think that speaks volumes. It wasn't always the case. From decriminalisation through the equalisation of the age of consent, the introduction of anti-discrimination law, the repeal of Section 2A, gender recognition legislation, adoption and fostering, moves towards equal family law, civil partnership and now equal marriage, all the way along there have been the voices of dissent. I believe that they are diminishing, both in their number in society at large and in the substance of their arguments. But that persistent opposition does remain. And I have to say to Alex Johnson in particular, it has not always been expressed to me in the respectful tones which he described. There is a vociferous opposition to LGBT equality and human rights still in our society, the inheritors of those people who objected every step of the way from decriminalisation onwards. Some of them, in correspondence that I've received, simply seem to be baffled at the idea that same-sex relationships should be treated with any degree of respect or equality. Often, the prejudice is couched in religious terms, and I would make the case that claiming religious justification for prejudice does not make that prejudice any less objectionable. But I do want to endorse the comments from Kevin Stewart a few moments ago, that very often it's hierarchies that represent that prejudice. They don't necessarily represent the views of the people they claim to. There are many people who perceive this bill principally in religious terms, but let's remember once again that most people who get married in Scotland these days choose not to involve religion in any way. Most marriages are fully secular. And for me, it's important to assert that religious freedom, yes, it includes freedom of religion. It also includes freedom from religion. These are both important aspects of religious freedom. And I have yet to hear, in this debate or in any other so far, any clear, coherent moral argument that suggests that same-sex relationships are in any way inferior or less worthy of respect and equal status. Presiding Officer, it's important now that we have this legislation on the verge of being passed, that we do look beyond our current situation and beyond Scotland as well. As we do that, we see some of the countries where the fight for equality and LGBT human rights is not about pensions and inheritance. It's about life and death still. And in some of those places, it is still some strands of organised religion and their hierarchies which still continue to offer the single most consistent source of hostility to LGBT people's dignity, rights, equality, well-being and safety. I believe it's important, as we welcome some countries where people are struggling with that question of life and death on LGBT equality. As we welcome some of those countries to Glasgow, we take pride in telling the particular story of Scotland's progress from a country that felt it was unable to decriminalise homosexuality at the same time as the rest of the UK, from societies in which, in Glasgow and Edinburgh, people felt it wasn't safe yet to have a pride march. You couldn't do that here. Our story of our progress from that country to this, to a country which is proud to pass equal marriage legislation for this generation and for the future. Thank you, Presiding Officer.